And Rabbi Mendel, take it away.
Thank you. There's a film, I'm going to start with a film again, called Ted, 2 films. And in the second film, it's a teddy bear that comes to life. And they want to experiment to research how to make more of these teddy bears. They have to rip it apart. And in the film, there's a scene where there's a court case, and they have to determine whether or not the bear is property, or if the bear can be defined as a human, therefore he has human lives, and killing it would be murder. Which is an interesting question for a rabbi to try analyze. Would this teddy bear have human rights, making it illegal to kill him, to experiment on him, or is it just a property, a teddy bear, and it's not considered a human? So the question would be, what is a human? Anyone?
And if I may rephrase it, is what distinguishes us from animals?
Well, yeah.
Sorry?
You have a different soul.
Yeah, but that's very hard to judge. Does the bear have the soul? Does this teddy bear have that soul?
No.
Okay, no, and therefore you'd say it's okay to kill the teddy bear. Or there's a TV series called Star Trek where there's an episode where a character called Data, and they want to have the same court case there, whether or not it has consciousness, in which case would it be against their universe or whatever, their law, to experiment on it. So it's
and actually, it's very, very relevant to these days with AI, because we're
I'm no scientist, but I'm of the opinion that it's very probable that someday there'll be another form of conscious life, whether it's going to be eventually a different species evolving to developing consciousness in a really long time, or if AI could develop consciousness. I am of the opinion someday that will, more probable than not, very possibly it could happen. So this actually could have a halachic ramification. So what I'm hearing is that we're determining only humans that were born to humans could have a soul. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that your position? If you're born to a human, then you have a human soul. So a teddy bear that comes to life would not have a human soul. Right. So I'm going to do a class this time and a different time. Today I'm just going to show 2 narratives from 2 different, what we call sugiyot, 2 different Talmudic discussions. And I'm personally of the opinion that it would have a human soul. And then we'll discuss that maybe next time, how I reach that conclusion.
So just to be clear, you're of the opinion that
the teddy bear would be a human. Yes.
The teddy bear the teddy bear in that film would be a human.
Yeah.
And by virtue of the fact that it speaks, basically, and communicates, is that what you're...
Because it has all the qualities which make us as humans special. All the reasons it's wrong to kill a human would apply to this teddy bear. This would be for my next class, though, where I'll discuss what makes humans special and what makes a teddy... What is it about humans? And I'll discuss mainly based on sources. So it won't just be my opinions. So today I'll discuss mainly 2 sources and the 2 narratives in the source. The first one is when a woman gives birth, she becomes ritually impure. If she gives birth to a girl, she becomes ritually impure for 2 weeks. If she gives birth to a boy, she becomes impure for 1 week. And the Mishnah has many cases discussing this about alternatives. And there's a dispute in the Mishnah if a woman miscarries a animal. So her miscarriage comes up with the shape of an animal or a bird. Is she impure from this or not or is she not impure? So in the Mishnah, there's a dispute between Rabbi
Is that a possibility? Is that a physical possibility?
So everyone always asks that. Did the Mishnah actually think that could happen? Well, I doubt it could actually happen, right? Or maybe slightly resembling it, but did the Mishnah think it could happen is really the important question here. So the Or Zarua was a commentary on the Talmud, and he discusses not specifically this Mishnah, but the Talmudic discussions around this Mishnah, saying that it's all hypothetical. But it seems as though most rabbis think that the Talmud did think of this literally, and we'll just quote Talmudic passages about this soon, and you will see that Talmud probably did think that this was a possibility, that a woman would give birth to a child.
To an animal.
To an animal, yeah. So,
we had last week's parsha about the prohibition against a woman bringing an animal upon herself. Could that result maybe scientifically in a weird...
I'm not a scientist. Okay. In the Mishnah, there's a dispute between Rabbi Meir and Chachamim. If she has a miscarriage in the shape of an animal, is this child an animal or a human? Essentially, would be what it seems like the dispute is. Chachamim say it's not a human, and therefore the woman doesn't become impure. And the Rabbi Meir says the woman does become impure, implying that this child is considered a human because the child was born to a human. So if this child is male, she'd have to wait 1 week. If she was female, you'd have to wait 2 weeks. Now the question is the Mishnah only discussing the laws of impurity, or is it actually the way we define humanity? Meaning, did Rabbi Meir and Chachamim have a disagreement on how to define humans with other aspects also? And this comes down to the way rabbis understand the Talmud discussing this. There's a very funny Jerusalem Talmud discussing this, where it says that those that followed the rabbis who believed that this is not a human child because it was born as an animal, they would make fun of Rabbi Meir's position, saying, suppose the woman gave birth to another child. So she gave birth to a bird. The bird flew to the top of the tree, and that second child then gets married someday and dies without children. So his wife needs yibum. His wife needs to or a chalitza. So we'd go to this raven on the top of the tree and we tell him, can you please come and marry this woman or give her a chalitza? It's absolutely absurd. So Talmud said, how could you possibly think that an animal is human? How could you think that this animal, just because she was born to a human mother, that you'd say that this is a human? It's insane. She's on top of it. So it picked a scenario where it's absurd to think of this creature as a human. To which the Talmud responds, well, I can ask the same question to the rabbis. Why? Because the rabbis believe that if the face is fully shaped like an animal, that it's an animal. But if the face is fully shaped like a human, then it's a human. The way we define the characteristics of the child being born is by the face. So Jerusalem Talmud puts up a question for the rabbis. Suppose you've got an ox and it's eating in the field like any ox would, but it's got a human face, then you'd say, okay, this is a human. But if you've got a human, his entire body is human, and he's sitting in the yeshiva studying Talmud, right? But he's got the head of a cow, he's got the face of a cow, so you'll say, okay, he's learning Talmud in the yeshiva, and he's sitting and learning, understanding, but because his face is of that of an animal, therefore I could kill him. That's completely absurd, right? So therefore they determined, seemingly Jerusalem Talmud determined that what makes him a human is not how he was born, rather, right, these scenarios of being on top of a tree, learning, eating, right, the characteristics of the species, and defining him as being born to a mother with that shape this Mishnah is only relevant for the laws of ritual impurity. It doesn't matter when it comes to defining the species of that animal. This is the one way of studying this Talmud. Should I repeat very quickly this Jerusalem Talmud? Because I feel like it's very nuanced.
Can I just say something? We'll make one point before you repeat.
Yeah.
Just give I think Talmudic passages such as this throw people off a little bit because it's like, wait, what? People get stuck up on like, wait, it's not a realistic scenario. What are you talking about? This is like, what are we playing make-believe here? And I think it's important just for people to recognize that in the analytic process that the Talmud spends most of its time doing, it requires extremes in order to identify very specific points that the Talmud is trying to address, and therefore it will take scenarios that are completely unrealistic to create those extreme scenarios to help us understand the point it's making. And I think that no one should get thrown off by that.
Right, but it also seems as though the Talmud believed that this could happen. Many rabbis write this was all hypothetical. The Or Zaru I mentioned about this Talmud, Jerusalem Talmud writes that in a different place he writes many things in Talmud are just hypotheticals for halacha studying, and he cites this Talmud as an example. But many rabbis, and from the Talmud it seems that way, that they believed that this was like a real thing. They were, I guess the medicine back then was different to today, or the science wasn't as developed, and they believed this could happen, and I guess they had certain people coming from different countries saying crazy stories. So they believed in a lot of things which today to us seem absurd. I believe the Talmud did believe that this could happen and did happen, and they felt that this was a legitimate halachic discussion like any other. But you're right, it could have just been hypothetical. So the important point here in the Talmud is, if the way I just delivered the Talmud is saying like this. it's absurd to think that when the Mishnah says that if it's born as a human, right, then it's a human, but if it's born as an animal, then it's a dispute between Rabbi Meir and Chachamim, whether or not it's human. Since it obviously isn't who it's born to, which just determines whether it's human or not, it's its characteristics. It's absurd to say that if a person, his entire body is person, and he's sitting in yeshiva studying, but he's got the face of an animal, that therefore he should be considered a animal, and that you could kill him. And it's equally as absurd to say that an animal which is sitting in the field, and he's just got a human face, but it's fully an animal, it's absurd to think that this animal would be considered human because of his face. So rather, it's only the shape that's born that determines the species with regards to ritual impurity. But it's not how we define the species. That's essentially what the Jerusalem Talmud said here. So the argument I'm presenting based on this Jerusalem Talmud is that when the Mishnah is deciding whether the child born is human or not, it's not talking about human rights. It's not talking about how we define a human. It's talking about when there's ritual impurity for the mother, right? Where it has to be a human child for her to become impure, right? So it has to be in the shape of a human child. It doesn't have to actually be a human child. So when the Mishnah is deciding if it looks like a human or looks like an animal, is ritually impure or not, for this halacha, we're not discussing whether it's actually a human. We're discussing whether or not it's perceived as a human. So the argument I'm making here is if a woman gives birth to a teddy bear, she might not become ritually impure. But killing her would still be wrong, because what we see from the Jerusalem Talmud is that the Mishnah was only discussing the laws of impurity, ritual impurity, right? The Mishnah is not discussing the definition of a human. Why? So the Jerusalem Talmud explains why. Because it's absurd to think that a creature which is sitting in yeshiva and studying, just because it looks like an animal, therefore you could kill it. That's absurd, right? So the same would apply to the teddy bear. It's absurd to think that just because it doesn't have the shape of a human, that it's not a human and therefore it's okay to kill it. That same logic would apply elsewhere. That's the argument.
It's born with deformities or something, it loses that shape, for example.
Right, yes.
Like that.
Yes, well, deformities, if it's, let's say, a slight deformity, it still looks like a human. But if it's really deformed, like in the case of the Mishnah, where you look at it, you say, oh, wow, this looks like a different creature. This looks like an animal, looks like a, right? And this has happened in relatively modern history, where people are born. There's an interesting story. This happened in maybe 18th, 19th century rabbi. He wrote a book, Tshuva Me'ahava. He was a very big rabbi, and it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch by the commentary. So it's a very famous and important responsum in this topic. A child was born in a place, and they were freaked out. It was like a freaky child that was born, and they didn't want to keep it alive. They said, we might not want to kill it, but we just won't feed it, and it will die on its own. That's the logic they came up with. And he wrote a response with many reasons why they have to keep it alive, and obviously you can't kill it. And one of the reasons they wanted to kill let the child die was because they claimed that this is not a human child. They said, well, this looks like an animal. It's half human, half animal. And how could you expect the mother to breastfeed such a horrifying looking child? And it was like a really crazy. So we think of Mishnah, that was 2,000 years ago, even in relatively modern history. This very example from the Mishnah happened. So when I'm saying that in Mishnah they believe this could have happened, in modern history people thought that this happens, where a half human, half child is born.
A baby with the head of an ant, and I
Right.
don't know what's going on.
Okay, I'll try.
I want to know where the line is.
For
Where's the
what?
line?
For what?
Oh, this creature that came out of this woman. Maybe it's is it
Right, so-
It looks a bit like an animal. Let's say the animal.
Yeah.
And where's the line? I've made the terrible mistake of, because since smartphones existed, and my sick mind, I've gone online and seen what comes out of human beings. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, but it's unbelievable. So I kind of have pictures in my mind of what you're talking about, and I've seen some humans that was like,
Yeah.
is that? So then I'm thinking, well, where's the line? How can they look at the face? Is the face actually a face, or is it something deeper than that, maybe?
Great question.
Right, that's an interesting question. So again, I feel like you're talking about defining it as a human and not whether or not it's shaped like a
That's what
human,
we were saying
which are two
before,
different
that was
issues.
originally. I've seen
I'm
that.
actually more interested in what's this face.
I've seen that.
Right, so where is the cutoff point? So it depends on which Talmudic answer you go with. for now we're going with the answer that we follow the face. So they both agree that if it's a face of an animal, it's an animal. If it's a face of a human, it's a human. And they're only disagreeing if, let's say, it's half-half. There's a film, Penelope, I think. Anyone knows that film?
I don't know the film, but my guess is that it's pronounced Penelope.
Penelope, probably. I've obviously never seen the film. I just saw it. Right, Penelope, probably. Right, so it's a person who's got half the face as a human and half the face as a pig, right? So is it a human or is it not? That's the same theme in that film, apparently. That's essentially the question here. If it's born with a shape where it's got, let's say, a human eye or two human eyes, so is that a human or not? And that's their disagreement. But their disagreement is only whether or not it's got the shape of a human, which is what matters for the laws of impurity. The discussion isn't whether or not it's actually human. In that story with this child born, that's actually the approach that rabbi takes. So this is great. I've solved the problem. I could have, in theory, ended the class here. The problem is that there's two narratives here. There's another way of studying that Talmud. The Talmud wasn't saying it's absurd. The Talmud was saying it as a statement. The Talmud was saying that we follow the face, and therefore, even if the entire body is of a human, and he's sitting in yeshiva studying, if the face is a face of an animal, then you can go and shecht him and eat him, and right? So the Talmud wasn't saying it as like well, that's absurd. The Talmud was saying it as a normal statement, saying that all we care about is the face. If it's the face of a human, it's a human. The face of an animal, it's an animal. And the Mishnah was not only discussing ritual impurity, the Mishnah was discussing the definition of mankind.
That's the case.
So essentially, you've got two explanations for this Talmudic passage. And I won't say, okay, which one's more? You've got a lot of rabbis on both sides that can start piling up names, like and then count, which side has more. And you have to also start addressing which rabbis are more important. I'm not interested in doing that. I'll just say they're both legitimate ways of studying the Talmud, showing two narratives of studying the Talmud. You find the same two narratives also by the commentaries on the Babylonian Talmud. But this, I think I'll stop for this discussion regarding the first sugya about the birth. The second one is regarding the golem. And in my next class, I'll discuss mainly the golem. In this class, I'm discussing less the golem. Was the golem a human? I don't know if everyone knows what the golem is.
A quick snapshot.
So I'll give a quick introduction to the golem. The golem, well, the famous golem was the one of the Maharal of Prague. The golem was, I believe he created him to fight, anti-Semitism, and it was like a monster that keeps growing. And in all the stories of the golem, almost all of them, it's a similar theme where it started growing and it became dangerous. So they wanted to before anything terrible happens, to kill the golem. And usually the creator was actually the one that killed the one who he created. And there are many interesting parts to this to the story. I actually once wrote an article on whether or not you're allowed to kill a golem. So if you actually go into Google and you type, does halacha permit, or are you according to halacha allowed to kill a golem, or does Jewish law allow the killing of a golem? Probably the article you'll see, probably the first result would be my article. It's a Hungarian website, so don't get freaked out. So the golem was most probably a fictional character. I'm not going to give a speech here on the history of the golem and whether or not what are the proofs this way or that way, especially since there are so many golems. It's hard to disprove each and every one of them. And some of them are allegedly so old, like Abraham. There's no possible way of disproving it if we don't have any historical records of.
You're saying that there's a story of Abraham having made a golem.
Yes. There's a.
Where is that story?
It's based on a midrash. It says "V'hanefesh asher asu b'Haran," the soul which Abraham made in Haran. And there are different explanations. Some people believe it means that he had converts. One of the explanations is that he created the golem. The tribes, the Shlach HaKadosh writes that the 12 tribes, who did they marry? So they created female golems and they were with them.
It's not obviously a real story.
So, what?
It's not a real story.
Well, that's debatable.
So that's the question. Do these actually exist? I am a naturally born skeptic. So I don't. But again, most people who are more mystically inclined, I don't know if they necessarily believe in it, but they find more appealing the history element in it. I'm less so mystically inclined. I find the mythical element of the story a lot more intriguing. Yes. Yeah. So what originally got me fascinated in this sugya, both of these sugyot, is I'm very interested in weird Talmudic things and Jewish things, but also it's a fascinating myth in the sense that there's an emotional element to the person who created something with a need. It's like a child almost. And the child grows up to become more and more independent, or until the extent where the person who created him has to kill the one he did so. And no one really speaks about the halachic, explanation. How is it legal to kill a golem? So I guess I'd put the question at the table. Suppose you created a golem.
We've got scenarios.
How would you feel about killing your golem?
No, but-
Can I just interject that I mean, your whole direction here is assuming that consciousness is not God-given,
No, I do believe it's God-given, but
not developed. I'm saying as opposed to being developed, you could argue the development of consciousness is also God-given. But I'm saying, the normative approach of Torah Judaism is that consciousness,
Right.
it happened
but
when God created the world, right? And even if there is some sort of evolution, but the consciousness specifically is what we're talking about. Are you saying that there are creationists that say that consciousness
could develop
that
theoretically?
consciousness develop?
So in my next class, we'll speak about many sources who believe that the golem could have consciousness and like a human. And there are certain Rishonim who believe that that's not. So that would be mainly my next class, where on a theological point, is it only God that could create human consciousness? So that's a massive debate within earlier rabbis, because the Talmud says, okay, I'll say this now, and maybe I'll switch some of my information now with next class and next class now. The Talmud says, this would be the Talmudic passage about the golem. It's the human sin which separates us from God. And then following this, the Talmud says that Rabbah created the golem, sent him to Rabbi Zera, right? Rabbi Zera asked, so he couldn't respond, asked him a question, so he said, go back to dust, right? And essentially killed him. He died. So the question is, what does it mean that if humans were different, if didn't sin, they'd be no different to God? What separates us to God is our sins. So there's a discussion amongst very early rabbis, going back probably about 1,000 years. Sefer HaBahir, there are many rabbis discussing this. And the one position is that only humans could. The Rasag, for example, Rab Saadia Gaon, right, believe, they say in his name that he said in the prayer we say, Hadea v'hadibur l'chai olamim. In Shabbat we say it, right? The way he explained that apparently was that the dibur is a borrowed term. It means speech, but it's a borrowed term for what's unique about humans. That is only for the creator. Only God could create human consciousness. The other alternative is that a human could create a golem which could speak and would have a normal status as a human. And that's why if a human didn't sin, he'd be able to create such a golem. The only reason golems can't speak is because the creator sinned in one way or another. And so, for example, the Rebbe Maharash, so as Chabad, I'd find that a lot more authoritative than other source because he's one of the Chabad rabbis. He writes that if Abraham would have created a golem, since he wrote the code of creation, wrote the book, right, then his golem might have been able to speak, and that would have been a regular, normal human. So I'm going to side with the Chabad rabbis. But again, if you want to take the approach that only God can create consciousness, that would be probably a theological point, and that would probably be the same dispute. And as Chabad, I would follow the Rebbe Maharash. And again, I don't, with debates like this that goes back 1,000 years, and there are many rabbis on each side. For example, the Maharalmi Prague sides with the side that says only God could. I would argue he has a bone in the game because his golem couldn't speak. So maybe he wanted to say, I didn't sin because no golems can speak because only God can create.
You can't argue that and at the same time, in the same breath, say that you don't believe that he ever made a golem.
That's fair. Okay, so I think I'll end the class here and have a Q&A session. And I'm sorry for not finishing my point.
Before the Q&A, can you just spend 3 minutes and just give us a very short point-by-point synopsis of what you've said up until now?
Yeah, maybe I'll do a point-by-point synopsis of what my class would be, and then I'll continue next with finishing it off. The question is, how do we define a human? What makes someone a human? In the film Ted, a teddy bear comes to life. Is that a human or not? And we had a debate in this very room whether or not Ted would be considered a human deserving of human rights. And I was just going to show that this debate goes back to Talmudic times, where it seems as though there's a dispute with commentaries in the Talmud regarding a woman who gives birth to a child. But the one way of studying the Talmud would be that it's absurd to think that an animal, because it's got the shape of a human, the face of a human, that would make him human. And it's equally absurd to think that if someone's studying in the yeshiva, studying Talmud, and then you'd go and say, well, he's got an animal-like face, so therefore we could kill him. So the Talmud says it's absurd, and therefore whenever we see these discussions, it's not talking about defining human value and someone as a human species. It's only with regards to the laws of ritual impurity that we decide that the face matters to define the creature. The other way of studying the Talmud would be that when the Talmud says that it's the face that determines the species, that is a categorical definition, and therefore it's not absurd. Rather, on the contrary, the Talmud is saying it's a statement that even if it's studying the Talmud in the yeshiva, if it's got the face of an animal, it's an animal and you could kill it. The second source that we see the same two narratives would be the golem. By the golem, we see the same two narratives regarding a golem, whether or not the golem would be considered human or an animal. And with that, I yield the floor to the Q&A.